Have you ever opened your banking app and just for a second braced yourself, expecting to see almost nothing there? Maybe you've done that little mental math. If I buy this coffee, am I going to be short on groceries? If I pay this bill, what's left for gas? If that feels familiar, you're not broken and you're definitely not alone. For a lot of people in America, money isn't just numbers on a screen. It's stress, it's arguments, it's that knot in your stomach every time rent is due. But here's what almost nobody tells you. There is a specific dollar amount where that constant anxiety starts to fade. A point where you stop asking, how do I survive until next paycheck? And you finally start asking, okay, how do I actually get ahead? And no, I'm not talking about being a millionaire. I'm not even talking about six figures in the bank. The number is much smaller, much more realistic. And that's exactly why it's so powerful. I'm a financial educator, and in this video, I'm going to break down the truth about the $20,000 milestone. Why it quietly separates people who stay stuck living paycheck to paycheck from people who eventually build real wealth, and why most financial gurus never bring it up. If you're tired of starting over every few months, if you've tried to save before and watched your balance slide right back to zero, stay with me. By the end of this video, you'll understand why $20,000 is such a psychological turning point and how to use it as the foundation for your future financial freedom. When most people in the US think about being rich, they jump straight to extremes. $1 million in the bank, the big house in the suburbs, the six-figure salary, luxury car, perfect Instagram life. And a lot of financial gurus online reinforce that picture. They talk about six figures or you're failing, or throw around goals like 1 million, 10 million, retire at 35, as if you're either playing at that level or you're losing the game. The problem with that is simple. If the target is always $1 million away from where you are, your brain files wealth under impossible. You feel like nothing you do matters unless it's some massive move, some crazy business, some overnight success. So you scroll, you dream, and then you go back to living paycheck to paycheck, feeling behind. From a professional standpoint, that's not how real wealth building actually works. Real wealth doesn't start at seven figures. It starts the moment your money stops controlling every decision you make. So instead of asking, how do I become a millionaire? A much better question is, how do I build and protect my first meaningful cushion of savings? For most people, that realistic game-changing target isn't 1 million or even 100,000. It's that first $20,000, not a flashy number, not something you brag about on social media, but a level that quietly starts to change how you think, how you feel, and how you make financial decisions. When you're living with little or no savings, your brain isn't thinking about wealth, it's thinking about survival. This is what psychologists often call survival mode. Every decision is filtered through, how do I make it to the end of the month? That's when you stay in a job you hate because missing one paycheck feels terrifying. You say yes to overtime you don't want, clients you can't stand, schedules that burn you out, not because they're good for your career, but because you're scared of what happens if the money stops for even a week. In that state, you're not optimizing for long-term growth. You're just trying not to drown. A simple way to picture it is this. Trying to plan your financial future when you have no cushion is like trying to plan a vacation while your kitchen is on fire. Technically, you could talk about flights and hotels, but your brain won't let you. It's locked on the emergency right in front of you. Now, here's where the $20,000 milestone becomes a psychological turning point. For a lot of people in the US, somewhere around 3 to 6 months of living expenses in cash or very safe savings lands roughly in that $20,000 range. The exact number will vary by city and lifestyle, but the effect is similar. For the first time, you have a real buffer between you and disaster. All of a sudden, the questions in your head start to change. Instead of, can I pay rent next month? You start asking, is this job still right for me? Instead of, how do I avoid overdrafting? You start thinking, how do I grow this and what's my next smart move? The biggest power of the $20,000 milestone isn't that it makes you rich. It's that it turns down the volume on fear. It moves your brain from pure survival into a mode where you can actually think strategically, take calculated risks, and make better long-term choices with your money and your career. Let's talk about this from a numbers point of view for a second, because I want you to see that $20,000 is not some fantasy number. It's actually very reachable if you give it a real plan. Imagine you're able to set aside about $1,000 a month. That might come from a mix of cutting a few big expenses, picking up a side hustle, maybe saying no to some impulse purchases that used to be automatic. Now, instead of letting that money sit in a checking account, you're putting it into a basic, diversified investment, something that historically has returned around 7 to 8% a year over the long term. At that pace, it takes roughly a year and a half to get to your first $20,000. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That stretch is the hardest. That's when it feels like you're always saying no. No to eating out as much, no to upgrades, no to the I deserve this purchases. You're rebuilding habits, and that's uncomfortable. But here's where the math starts to quietly become your friend. Once you've got around $20,000 invested and it's earning, say, 8% a year on average, that's about $1,600 a year in growth without you doing anything extra. No extra shifts, no overtime, no new job. That's just your money doing its job. And $1,600 isn't just a line on a statement. In real life, that can look like a month or two of groceries for a family, or most of a year's worth of utilities, or covering some surprise car repair without panic. Compare that to when you only have $2,000 invested. A 10% gain on $2,000 is $200. Nice, but it doesn't really move the needle for most households. A 10% gain on $20,000 is $2,000. That's a completely different feeling. Same percentage, same market, same strategy, but now the results are big enough that you actually notice them. That's why this milestone matters. It's the point where compound growth stops being a theory you read about and starts becoming something you can literally feel in your day-to-day life. By the time you've built up $20,000, the most important change isn't in your bank app. It's in who you had to become to get there. You don't accidentally save that kind of money in the US today. To hit that milestone, you've probably done a few very adult things that most people avoid for years. You've tracked where your money actually goes, not just where you think it goes. You've learned to say no to a lot of short-term dopamine, the extra nights out, the random Amazon orders, the upgrades you wanted but didn't really need. You've flipped the script from I spend first and save what's left to I pay myself first and spend what's left. That's not just behavior. That's identity. When you see $20,000 sitting there, what it really represents is proof. Proof that you can control your money instead of letting it control you. Proof that you can delay gratification, that you can stick to a plan for more than a week, that you can keep a promise you made to yourself months ago. And that proof changes how you move through life. Before that milestone, it's easy to overthink every tiny purchase. You stand in front of the coffee shop wondering if a $4 latte is irresponsible. You feel guilty for buying a small treat because you're never sure if you're messing up your whole month. After you've built a real cushion, that mental noise starts to fade. You're not obsessing over every small swipe of your card because you know the big stuff is taken care of. You've already done the hard work of protecting yourself. Your focus naturally shifts. Instead of asking, should I buy this coffee? You're asking, am I living in the right city for my goals? Is my rent too high for my income? Am I investing in the right places? What can I do this year to permanently increase what I earn? That's the real upgrade. $20,000 doesn't just buy you safety, it buys you a new lens. You stop thinking like someone who's constantly on the edge and start thinking like someone who is building something bigger than just the next paycheck. One of the most underrated things $20,000 buys you isn't a car, a trip, or some gadget. It buys you options. It buys you what I like to call walking away money. Walking away money means this. If a job is toxic, if your boss is a nightmare, if the culture is burning you out, you are not trapped. You could walk away, and realistically cover a few months of living expenses while you look for something better. You're no longer chained to the paycheck in the same way. Before you have that cushion, the equation is brutal. You put up with a bad manager because you're scared of missing rent. You don't ask for a raise because deep down, you're afraid they might say no and replace you. You don't take time off to interview. You don't explore other industries because any disruption in income feels like a disaster. When every dollar is already spoken for, losing the job equals I'm screwed. So you play small. You keep your head down. You accept things you shouldn't accept. Once you've built around $20,000 in a real safety net, the dynamic shifts. You're still responsible. You're not storming out of the office for fun. But you negotiate from a place of much less fear. You can look your boss in the eye and say, here's the value I bring, and here's the compensation I'm looking for, without that panic in the background. And that change in your internal state is visible. You speak more clearly. You set boundaries more calmly. You're more willing to raise your hand for challenging projects, because you're not acting out of desperation anymore. What tends to happen next is a positive loop. You show up with more confidence. You get trusted with higher impact work. Your performance improves. Your income and opportunities grow. You're able to save and invest more, which makes you even less afraid. That's the quiet power of walking away money. The $20,000 itself is important, but the real value is the freedom it gives you to make career decisions based on what's right for you, not just what pays you by Friday. Hitting $20,000 for the first time feels amazing, and that's exactly why a lot of people blow it. Here's the pattern I see all the time. You finally see that number in your account, and the first thoughts are, I deserve something nice. I've been grinding for so long. So what happens? A newer car with a payment? A big vacation you put on a card because, hey, I've got savings now. Or a down payment on a house that's honestly way above what your income can comfortably support. On the surface, all of that sounds reasonable. You do work hard. You do deserve a good life. But here's the harsh truth from a financial standpoint. In that moment, you're not rewarding yourself. You're tearing down the foundation you just spent months or years building. That first $20,000 is not a trophy. It's not a pat on the back from the universe. It's the concrete slab your entire future financial house is supposed to stand on. You don't rip up the foundation and then act surprised when the house never gets built. Think about the opportunity cost for a second. If you lock yourself into a $600 to $800 monthly car payment, that's money that could have been invested every single month for the next 20 or 30 years. Over time, that's the difference between having options and constantly needing the next paycheck just to stay afloat. The new car, the big trip, the status purchase. Those things can make you feel rich for a moment while quietly keeping you poor long term. Right now, with $20,000 saved, you're like someone who just planted a young tree of financial freedom. It's small, but it's alive and growing. Don't chop it down just because you're impatient and want a wooden table today. Let it grow, and it can eventually give you shade, fruit, and more wood than you'd know what to do with. So let's zoom out for a second and put all of this together. That $20,000 milestone is not some magic number. It doesn't turn you into a millionaire overnight. It's not a lottery ticket, and it's not a flex. What it is a turning point. It's the moment you stop living in pure survival mode. It's the point where one emergency doesn't wipe you out. It's the base layer that gives you options, lets you negotiate differently at work, and changes the way you think about every dollar that passes through your hands. So how do you actually get there, in a practical way? I like to break it down into a simple 3-step framework. EBG. Earn, build, grow. Step 1. E. Earn and eliminate. Your first job is to create some breathing room. That usually means finding a way to bring in an extra $200 to $500 a month, a part-time side hustle, freelancing, a few extra shifts, and cutting 2 or 3 of your biggest money leaks. Not skipping coffee, but renegotiating rent, dropping a car that's killing your budget, Canceling subscriptions you don't even use. You're creating fuel. Step 2. B. Build the 20,000 foundation. Once you've freed up cash, you give it a job, build 3 to 6 months of living expenses. For a lot of people, that's roughly around $20,000. Automate it. Set up a transfer the day your paycheck hits, so you're paying yourself first instead of hoping something is left over. This is your non-negotiable safety net. Step 3. G. Grow beyond 20,000. When you hit that milestone, you don't treat it like spending money. You protect it. That's your foundation. From there, you focus on learning the basics of investing. Broad index funds, ETFs, retirement accounts, and you use new savings and future raises to start growing your net worth above that base. $20,000 won't make you rich by itself. But without a foundation like that, it's incredibly hard to stay rich no matter how much you earn later. Your future self, 10, 20 years from now, is going to look back and either thank you or wish you had started sooner. That future version of you doesn't care about the shoes you bought this month. They care that you built a cushion and didn't blow it. So if this shifted the way you think about money, do 2 things. First, decide on your next concrete step toward that 20,000, even if it's just opening a separate savings or investment account today. And second, if this video gave you a different perspective, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone you know who's stuck in the paycheck-to-paycheck loop. Their first 20,000 might start with the conversation you share with them today.